of the road. See Matthew 5:45. The inclusion of sinners in the community of salvation, symbolized in table fellowship, is the most dramatic expression of the Ragamuffin Gospel and the merciful love of the redeeming God. Thorough biblical research indicates that Jesus either had his own home in Capernaum or at least shared one with Peter, Andrew, and their families. Undoubtedly, in his ministry as an itinerant evangelist, Jesus often slept on the side of the road or stayed with friends. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Matthew 8:20. But we may have taken this statement too literally. It is difficult to understand how Jesus could have been accused of entertaining sinners, see Luke 15:2, if he did not have some kind of home in which to do so. Upon returning home from his missionary journeys, Jesus probably had some kind of quasi-permanent residence wherein he often served as host. Meal sharing occurred with such regularity that Jesus was accused of being a drunkard and a glutton. See Luke 7:34. The guest list would include a ragtag parade of donkey peddlers, prostitutes, herdsmen, slumlords, and gamblers. A social climber Jesus was not. Status seekers today are selective about their dinner guests and make elaborate preparations. Linen, china, silver, fresh flowers, an exquisite Beaujolais, truffle sauce, Long Island duck with glazed raspberries, death by chocolate dessert, and so on, for people they want to stand well with. Then they anxiously await the morning mail to see if their dinner invitation is reciprocated. Consciously or unconsciously, the social gadflies of our day do not underestimate the ritual power of meal sharing. Jesus' sinner guests were well aware that table fellowship entailed more than mere politeness or courtesy. It meant peace, acceptance, reconciliation, and brotherhood. For Jesus, this fellowship at table with those whom the devout had written off was not merely the expression of liberal tolerance and humanitarian sentiment. It was the expression of his mission and message: peace and reconciliation for all, without exception, even for the moral failures. The gospel portrait of Jesus is that of a person who cherished life, and especially other people, as loving gifts from the Father's hand. The peripheral figures whom Jesus encountered in his ministry reacted in various ways to his person and his message, but few responded with gloom or sadness. And they were those, such as the rich young ruler, who rejected his message. The living presence of Jesus awakened joy and set people free. Joy was, in fact, the most characteristic result of all his ministry to ragamuffins. John's disciples and the Pharisees were keeping a fast when some people came to him and said to him, "Why is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not?" Jesus replied, "Surely the bridegroom's attendants cannot fast while the bridegroom is still with them. As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast." Mark 2:18-19. Jesus feasted while John fasted. Whereas John's call to conversion was essentially linked to penitential practices, the call of Jesus is fundamentally connected to being a table companion, eating and drinking with Jesus, in whom God's merciful manner with sinners is manifested. Breaking bread with Jesus was a festive celebration of good fellowship in which there was salvation. Asceticism was not only inappropriate, but unthinkable in the presence of the bridegroom. This remarkable passage illuminates the extraordinary enchantment cast by the carpenter Messiah. The ragamuffins discovered that sharing a meal with him was a liberating experience of sheer joy. He freed them from self-hatred, exhorted them not to confuse their perception of themselves with the mystery they really were, gave them what they needed more than anything else, encouragement for their lives, and delivered reassuring words such as, "Do not live in fear, little flock. Don't be afraid. Fear is useless. What is needed is trust. Stop worrying. Cheer up. Your sins are all forgiven." Small wonder that the evangelist Mark preserved this memory of Jesus with the utmost care. The contagious joy of Jesus, only carriers can pass it on, infected and freed his followers. The author of Hebrews says, Jesus Christ is the same today as he was yesterday and as he will be forever. 13:8. If Jesus appeared at your dining room table tonight with knowledge of everything you are and are not, total comprehension of your life story and every skeleton hidden in your closet, if he laid out the real state of your present discipleship with the hidden agenda, the mixed motives, and the dark desires buried in your psyche, you would feel his acceptance and forgiveness. For experiencing God's love in Jesus Christ means experiencing that one has been unreservedly accepted, approved, and infinitely loved, that one can and should accept oneself and one's neighbor. Salvation is joy in God, which expresses itself in joy in and with one's neighbor. Therefore, it is unimaginable to picture a wooden-faced, stoic, joyless, and judgmental Jesus as he reclined with ragamuffins. The human personality of Jesus is underrated when it is perceived as a passive mask for the dramatic speeches of divinity. Such timidity robs Jesus of his humanity, encases him in plaster of Paris, and concludes that he neither laughed, cried, smiled, nor got hurt, but simply passed through our world without emotional engagement. Mark records that a group of parents, who obviously sensed something of God's love in Jesus, wanted him to bless their little ones. The irritated disciples, fatigued by the long day's journey on foot from Capernaum of divinity, such timidity robs Jesus of his humanity, encases him in plaster of Paris, and concludes that he neither laughed, cried, smiled, nor got hurt, but simply passed through our world without emotional engagement. Mark records that a group of parents, who obviously sensed something of God's love in Jesus, wanted him to bless their little ones. The irritated disciples, fatigued by the long day's journey on foot from Capernaum to the district of Judea and the far side of the Jordan, attempted to shoo away the children. Jesus became visibly upset and silenced the 12 with a withering glance. Mark notes carefully that Jesus picked them up one by one, cradled them, and gave each of them his blessing. My friend Robert Frost comments, I am so glad Jesus didn't suggest they group all the children together for a sort of general blessing, because he was tired. Instead, he took time to hold each child close to his heart and to earnestly pray for them all. Then they joyfully scampered off to bed. One is tenderly reminded of a beautiful messianic passage from the prophets. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. attired, properly pedigreed, and who affirm my vision, echo my thoughts, stroke me, and make me feel good. Yet my inner child protests, I want new friends, not old mirrors. When our inner child is not nurtured and nourished, our minds gradually close to new ideas, unprofitable commitments, and the surprises of the Spirit. Evangelical faith is bartered for cozy, comfortable piety. A failure of nerve and an unwillingness to risk distorts God into a bookkeeper, and the gospel of make me feel toward the fellow travelers. Isaiah 40:11. I think there is a lesson here for anyone who would seek to set any kind of false condition concerning just who should be the recipients of God's grace. He blessed them all. A brief digression. There is a wondrous open-mindedness about children and an insatiable desire to learn from life. An open attitude is like an open door, a welcoming disposition toward the fellow travelers who knock on our door during the middle of a day, the middle of the week, or the middle of a lifetime. Some are dirtballs, grungy, disheveled, and bedraggled. The sophisticated adult within me shudders and is reluctant to offer them hospitality. They may be carrying precious gifts under their shabby rags, but I still prefer clean-shaven Christians who are neatly attired, properly pedigreed, and who affirm my vision, echo my thoughts, stroke me, and make me feel good. Yet my inner child protests, I want new friends, not old mirrors. When our inner child is not nurtured and nourished, our minds gradually close to new ideas, unprofitable commitments, and the surprises of the Spirit. Evangelical faith is bartered for cozy, comfortable piety. A failure of nerve and an unwillingness to risk distorts God into a bookkeeper, and the gospel of grace is swapped for the security of religious bondage. Unless you become as little children, heaven will be filled with 5-year-olds. Burkhard writes, I fear for the lawyer whose only life is corporate tax, the doctor whose whole existence is someone else's prostate, the business executive whose single responsibility is to his stockholders, the athlete who puts all his eggs in an 18-inch basket, the theologian who thinks the world can be saved by theology. A closed mind kills marriages and human relations. It deadens feelings and sensitivities. It makes for a church that lives in 1,001 tunnels with no communication and no exit. If we maintain the open-mindedness of children, we challenge fixed ideas and established structures, including our own. We listen to people in other denominations and religions. We don't find demons in those with whom we disagree. We don't cozy up to people who mouth our jargon. If we are open, we rarely resort to either or. Either creation or evolution, liberty or law, sacred or secular, Beethoven or Madonna. We focus on both and, fully aware that God's truth cannot be imprisoned in a small definition. Of course, the open mind does not accept everything indiscriminately. Marxism and capitalism, Christianity and atheism, love and lust, Moet Chandon and vinegar. It does not absorb all propositions equally, like a sponge, nor is it as soft. But the open mind realizes that reality, truth, and Jesus Christ are incredibly open-ended. Digression foreclosed. The ragamuffin spirit of Jesus sometimes surfaces in the most unlikely settings and is often totally absent in places we most expect to find it. Let me close this chapter with a tale of two communities, both cut close to the bone of my existence. One concerns alcoholics, the other involves Rosalind. On a sweltering summer night in New Orleans, 16 recovering alcoholics and drug addicts gather for their weekly AA meeting. Although several members attend other meetings during the week, this is their home group. They have been meeting on Tuesday nights for several years and know each other well. Some talked each other daily on the telephone. Others socialize outside the meetings. The personal investment in one another's sobriety is sizable. Nobody fools anybody else. Everyone is there because he or she made a slobbering mess of his or her life and is trying to put the pieces back together. Each meeting is marked by levity and seriousness. Some members are wealthy, others middle class or poor. Some smoke, others don't. Most drink coffee. Some have graduate degrees, others have not finished high school. For one small hour, the high and the mighty descend and the lowly rise. The result is fellowship. The meeting opened with the Serenity Prayer, followed by a moment of silence. The prologue to Alcoholics Anonymous was read from the Big Book by Harry, followed by the 12 steps of the program from Michelle. That night, Jack was the appointed leader. "The theme I would like to talk about tonight is gratitude," he began. "But if anyone wants to talk about something else, let's hear it." Immediately, Phil's hand shot up. "As you all know, last week I went up to Pennsylvania to visit family and missed the meeting. You also know I have been sober for 7 years. Last Monday I got drunk and stayed drunk for 5 days. The only sound in the room was the drip of Mr. Coffee in the corner. You all know the buzzword, HALT, in this program," he continued. "Don't let yourself get hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, or you will be very vulnerable for the first drink. The last 3 got to me. I unplugged the jug and—" Phil's voice choked and he lowered his head. I glanced around the table. Moist eyes, tears of compassion, soft sobbing, the only sound in the room. "The same thing happened to me, Phil, but I stayed drunk for a year." "Thank God you're back. Boy, that took a lot of guts." "Relapse spells relief, Phil," said a substance abuse counselor.